is it. The Ergonomics system is fully adjustable for individual comfort and can be released immediately if you panic. Take hold of the joysticks. With these, you will be in control of your virtual crafts, every movement within its virtual world. The only limit is your imagination.
Developing aero engines or even entire towns on a computer screen could revolutionize design throughout industry. But here at the Advanced Robotics Research Centre at Salford, they're concerned about flagging government interest. They fear that, as with other technological developments in the past, Britain may lose its lead because both government and industry don't react quickly enough.
Technology is exploding at a phenomenal rate. If we want to prevent the technological resource in this country from floundering, we really need a coordinated national strategy in order to make sure that the companies who will use the technology in the future will do so effectively.
The research my team's involved in, whilst being specifically focused in the areas of virtual, augmented and mixed reality research, is not solely focused on the technology. More importantly, what we're interested in is whether or not that technology is usable by human beings. So you see so much on YouTube and online about what this technology can and cannot do. But what we're trying to do here are test beds using virtual reality and what we call telepresence technology, where we're using headsets and gloves and other controllers to control robots to make sure that it's fit for purpose and to make sure that the human can use it.
Hey Bob, can you hear me?
Hi Max, yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Perfect. I haven't, I'm not running my video for a few reasons. So that's just to, I don't want there to be any lag with the reaction on my end that might influence your responses or anything like that. And then also to keep the bandwidth open.
Fine, understand.
Perfect.
I just noticed that my latest spaceship acquisition has toppled over. There you go. Look at that. So that's the USS Sulaco from the second Aliens film. So seriously good. I thought it had toppled. I've got to try and find a stand for it because it's a bit unbalanced. I'm in your hand.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, it's been a busy day. I'm part of something called the Centre for the New Midlands. I'm part on the digital board, and we're trying to get things moving there. I'm running the XR side of things, and with the aim of trying to provide an independent source of advice for the Midlands in the UK. That's the Birmingham region in the centre. Well, it's actually quite a large part of the centre of England. So there's that, and we've been hectic over the last couple of days getting the budget finalised for the next phase of the mixed reality defence medical project. So we're hoping that's going to start in June. The budget plan's been approved, or the business case, let's say, has been approved. So we're just waiting now for the agreement of how I've broken down the work packages.
I see. What about outside of work? How have you been?
Yeah, we're just not much really, if I'm honest. I mean, because of course I'm still officially in retirement, even though that's as you're aware, is a bit of a joke. I remember being very, very young with my brother, and in one of the rooms in my parents' house in Plymouth, there was an old cot. and there was an old tent. And I remember, and whether or not this led me into human factors and ergonomics, I don't know, but I remember putting the tent over the cot with my brother, pretending it was a spaceship, or possibly even Doctor Who's TARDIS, and drawing control panels on one of the wooden panels inside the cot. And I think that coupled with my dear late dad buying me some of the earliest Project Sword and Jerry Anderson toys in Plymouth, specifically Supercar. I don't know if you remember Supercar. And when I look at the price of the budgie model of Supercar on eBay now, I just there's no way on this earth I could afford it.
Lunar rovers float magically over powdered plains, range the crater's edge, their elastic train-like bodies conforming to every surface character of the moon. Here are bases of communication and supply, islands of existence built to withstand the melting heat of the lunar day, the shattering cold of the lunar night.
But that kind of combination, I think, really drove me into sci-fi. And there was another, the company Triang. The Triang, again, I don't know if everyone who sees this will be familiar. Triang was a company in the UK, I think it was UK, who built a lot of the early 00 gauge railways. And they brought out something called Battlespace, Triang Battlespace, with exploding container wagons and missiles and helicopters that took off from the low loaders on the railway thing. That also was purchased by my dear old dad. And so, yes, it was, what with that and the fact, I suppose, that my dad worked as an engineer on both conventional and nuclear submarines throughout his life, that had a major influence in me getting completely hooked on sci-fi of all genres. That's going back a good, that's probably going back a good 57 years now.
I find that really interesting and revealing because, well, just personally, my father, he had passed when I was younger, and he was an engineer. His father was an engineer, and my grandfather and great-grandfather, they're both stationary engineers working on energy projects, and my father was an industrial engineer. And so I'm not an engineer, but I can understand that way of thinking, sort of, and yeah. I relate to it in a certain way, right? And so I'm wondering, the next question is, do you feel like the work you do now was inherited in a way from your father's relationship with engineering?
I think a lot of it is. I mean, certainly, because my dad spent all of his working life in the naval base, or dockyard as it was called, the naval base at Plymouth. And I remember they used to have open days, and he used to make me queue up for hours on end just to get on board one of the old conventional diesel submarines. And I think that's interesting too, because my interest and love of things underwater, I'm sure stems from that. It was always an ambition of mine to get a short voyage on a submarine, which I did a few years ago. But I suppose inherited, yeah, definitely not genetically, but certainly in terms of the way my dad particularly brought me up. I think the interest in things, engineering, even when I was slightly older and made wine at home, it wasn't just a case of just buying a wine kit and doing it. I had to have all the chemicals to test and to do the titration and all this nonsense. So it was very much fostered by my parents. I think that interest in engineering and science. I'm not too sure my dad was that pleased when I went off to study psychology at university, but nevertheless, I came full circle. And again, that's courtesy of doing the postgrad degree in ergonomics. But yes, it's definitely a key influence from the very, very early days. it became obvious to me that I wasn't going, even though I quite enjoyed it, I wasn't put on this earth to be a clinical psychologist. I don't think I've got the patience to listen to people's problems. That sounds horrible. It's not really true, but that was not for me. And I quite enjoyed organizational psychology, and even then science fiction was driving what I was going to do, and in at then unknown respect. And somebody said to me, but do you realize, have you ever come across ergonomics? Never heard of it. Well, it's all about the study of the human and his or her relationship with machines and systems. And they do control panels and things like that. So control panels, wow. Now, this might be something of interest for me. So it was literally across the road in London from where I studied psychology. And I went, met the head of the department, and they were doing crazy stuff. Like they had their physiology lectures at the Institute of Aviation Medicine, one of the biggest air bases in the UK. They were doing things like you got the experience to drive a tube train on the London Underground. You would go down a coal mine, and there were course modules on designing control panels. Would you believe? So this was really too good to miss. But in terms of resources, there were really at that time only 2 major universities in the UK offering ergonomics. University College London was one, Loughborough was another. Loughborough had a bit of a bias towards sports science and sports and exercise science, but London was definitely the place that made my transition from being an academic in psychology into something that was going to get me into an industry that really fitted in with my personality and the things that I love doing.
Did you have a very long transition from university to working professionally?
No, I was incredibly lucky. When I started the postgraduate qualification in ergonomics, ergonomics hasn't been dropped, but it's human factors now. It's more or less the same thing, more or less. About a third of the way through that course, there was a job advert put on the notice board for human factors engineers to join British Aerospace, BAE Systems today, British Aerospace down there. So this job opportunity came up, and my colleagues on the course said, "Go on, this is definitely for you. Look, it's your science fiction and history coming true." So I went for the interview, got the job, and they held it open until October when my course is finished. So I went straight from university into the Human Factors Research Department of British Aerospace, which was located in a fabulously secluded place in an old World War II Hurricane Squadron officers' mess across the main runway in Filton, which is near Bristol. And my goodness, aren't I glad I did that? Actually, my first project when I got there was redesign the control panel for the Swingfire missile system. It was crazy. Everything I kind of wanted to do or thought I wanted to do came together all in one package, and it's, in many respects, I think it's kind of been the story of my life. I've been very fortunate in being in the right place at the right time, but getting that job at British Aerospace was one of the 2 major steps I took in my career. I don't think it had that much to do with my academic prowess. I've got through life being very enthusiastic, sometimes overly enthusiastic about what I do. So yes, I went down to British Aerospace. Obviously, they approved the postgraduate course I was doing because they'd taken people from there before. But going down there armed with information on the advanced flight deck and thinking about the guided weapons division of BAE, and having done some homework, and got very enthusiastic about developing future weapon systems, which was actually at the time quite a controversial thing to admit, still is today, I suspect. But I think a lot of it's to do with enthusiasm, can do, don't turn anything down, you only get one chance. just go for it. So I think that was a more significant factor in taking on that job, and then thank goodness being successful in the projects that I did. I spent many weeks on a barge in the middle of Loch Linnhe in Scotland on trials, observing what these guys were doing as they were sending the submersibles down to a prefabricated task box, I suppose you could call it.
Oceans of the world cover nearly 3/4 of its surface. This inner space, as it's been called, is almost as inaccessible as the distant planets. The deep sea, just like deep space, is an environment where man is alien, and where at best he can be little more than a temporary visitor, descending briefly to explore before returning to the surface.
And to then compare different kinds of manipulators, different kinds of sonars, and how they enhance the performance of the remote operator. And they compared that with a manned submersible, which was the old British Oceanics LR2, and it was one of the days where our project officer from the Department of Energy was due to dive, couldn't because he'd done his back in, and they said, "Would you like to go down instead?" And I said yes. And then things didn't go really to plan, and we were stuck down there for 13 hours, breathing on soda lime lung scrubbers, and wondering. I'd written my final letter to my fiancée and sealed it in cling film. So that was another interesting subsea experience.
So you almost died for science.
Well, yeah, yes, I'm glad I didn't. People thought I was mad afterwards, because I think it was a couple of months after that I actually went down in a one-man submersible in a flooded quarry in the middle of the UK. In fact, the submersible called the Mentice, it was the submersible that was used on the James Bond film. Was it For Your Eyes Only? I think. Yes, that's so volunteering to go down in a one-man sub, having been stuck in a three-man sub. People thought I was completely lunatic to do that, but it was great fun. One of the submersibles we were looking at was what they call an eyeball submersible. I can't even remember the name of it now. So there's obviously a large, round, quite mobile, quite agile submersible. And one of the companies that was involved in that initiative, I think it was Marconi at the time, had developed a head-mounted display to control this thing. And to be honest, the idea of telepresence was talked about then, but the implementation was diabolical, because this guy was wearing this head-mounted display, controlling this very mobile underwater eyeball vehicle. And every time he rotated on his chair, of course, the umbilical was spinning and spinning and spinning, and then the thing would spring back like a cold spring and get jammed and stuck on various other structures, necessitating divers to go down and rescue it, which I thought was a bit of a waste of time, really. Is the idea of you're replacing divers with these telepresence systems, but you're getting the divers to go down and recover the damn thing. So, but the idea of telepresence, we talked about it at the time, and we also talked about it when I was doing some work in the North Sea on semi-submersibles, looking at diving supervisors who look after the guys who go down to do all the welding and the movement of pipelines and things like that, and that was another quite harrowing experience. Obviously spending time in the North Sea, but realizing that the guys who were supposed to be supervising or controlling these underwater systems had no hope at all of understanding what was going on the seabed. Nothing. And so yes, even though virtual reality wasn't around at that point, this idea of situational awareness, how can we best prevent individuals from making mistakes, which one or two did when I was offshore. I'd say it was quite a harrowing experience. by using future technologies. And we came up with a few ideas. But I'll never forget the guy who was literally frog marched off the rig. All the instrumentation and displays he had in front of him were useless. He was actually building a little three-dimensional model of the seabed using cigarette boxes, match boxes on the panel in front of him. It was literally every time something changed, he would move a matchstick, or he would take a match head representing a diver and move it around. And it's no wonder this guy was so badly stressed that he had to be removed from the rig as a risk, but through no fault of his own. That was 1985, I would have said, because that happened just before we got our first contract from the European Space Agency, which is that's when things started to get very exciting. So 1984, 1985 was the offshore experience.
Mm-hmm. And so that was a clean transition into the ESA and working with NASA?
Yeah, it was. We teamed up with our colleagues at Stevenage, which is north of London, because they were the British Aerospace Space Division. And we won that contract. We didn't expect to because of the competition from particularly Germany and France when it comes to space robotics. But we won the contract to look at low Earth orbit telerobotics, and the whole space stuff lasted well up until the point I left British Aerospace in 1989, I think it was. But we dealt with the low Earth orbit telerobotics. We dealt with extravehicular activity, so the idea of superimposing displays on astronauts' helmets when they're going into EVA, rendezvous and docking of spacecraft. So, and that's, of course, it was in that period when I had my life-changing experience of virtual reality over at NASA Ames in California. That was that, and that was the number 2 biggest jolt in my career. So the idea behind the telerobotics work was to look at, again, different methods of how we could control these things in the presence of time delays. Usual kind of thing. Would stereoscopic vision help? What about haptic or force feedback to the joysticks? What happens in the case of time delays? So we were doing all this research, and I was lucky enough to be funded to go to a satellite servicing conference in NASA. What's the NASA? The NASA is it not Goddard? The one in Maryland. Can't remember, but anyway, attended this conference, and whilst I was there, I bumped into this fantastic guy called Dr. Steve Ellis. And Steve was one of the human factors researchers at the NASA Ames Research Lab in California, just south of San Francisco. And he said, well, seeing as you're here, would you like to pop over to San Francisco? I'll get you into NASA come hell or high water, and we'll show you what we're doing. So, being the naive person I was, and not realizing it took as long to get from Washington to San Francisco as it did to get from London to Washington, I nipped over to San Francisco. They got me into Ames, and amongst the other things, I did a little mini workshop on our human factors research, and then they put me in this helmet. I mean, it was just like a scuba mask with 2 pocket TVs that they got from Radio Shack, some basic optics that they got from a guy called Eric Howlett, a 3-coil tracking system, which ultimately became the Paul Hemus tracking system, and this white gauntlet glove with fiber optics. And the demonstration, and I still remember it vividly today, was an escalator. So it was a wireframe escalator where you had the steps going up one side and coming down the other, and then this bridge to go across the top, but wireframe. But my goodness, that was just such an impressive experience, given that my vestibular system was telling me, no, you're on solid ground, you're not moving, and my visual system was saying, you are. And when you get to the top, look down, which I did, and that was like, whoa, minimum stimuli possible, and I was getting that effect. And I came away from that visit to NASA a changed beast in terms of just my enthusiasm for what this could do. And the beauty of it was that they were not looking at so they were not looking at the virtual reality from a wow, Gucci tech point of view, although the tech was pretty Gucci at the time. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. But they were looking at it from a human factors perspective. You know, how much information could you display in a 360 wraparound around an astronaut who is wanting to have the optimum situational awareness on the space station? So all of a sudden, what NASA was doing, using this incredible piece of equipment, was linking back to what we did offshore and what we did with the submersibles back in the 80s. And I thought, there's a story here, and it's something that's got to be worth exploring. So got back to British Aerospace. At the time, there was little interest, unbelievably, in sponsoring a mini project to look into this from British Aerospace's perspective. There was some work going on with a British equivalent of what Tom Furness was doing at Wright-Patterson, which is a super cockpit. But obviously in the UK it was on a smaller scale. But in terms of looking at virtual reality generally as a human factors tool, there was no interest. So I thought, okay, well, I've got to do this. I've got to leave and find somewhere else. And again, concurrently, we joined part of the UK's National Robotics Initiative, and that was organised by the Department of Trade and Industry, the part of the government in London. And the guy who ran that said, have you ever thought of trying to get into this new advanced robotics research centre in the north of the country, in Salford, near Manchester? I said, well, I don't know, I'm a bit stayed in my ways. Will it be successful? He said, it's up to you. So I decided to jump ship, leave British Aerospace, went to Salford, went and joined the National Advanced Robotics Research Centre. And I remember, literally within the first week of joining, the chief executive sat me down, handed me a piece of paper, and he said, this is for any consumables or equipment you want for your research. And I opened it up, it was £100,000. And this was 1989. And I just couldn't believe it. You know, I said, well, that meant we could buy a VPL data glove, we could buy a VPL iPhone Model 2, we could look into developing our own, or your British computing system to run this stuff. So that again, that little transition big transition from British Aerospace into the Robotics Centre, and then being given a sensible budget to do something really sensible, just made all the difference. Yeah, it was that experience. We did try to set something up in Bristol with modified industrial robots, but again, lack of interest. So it was obvious that I had the ideas, but I was in the wrong environment to make those ideas come to fruition. But that all stemmed from that one literally 15-minute escalator experience, courtesy of Steve Ellis and Scott Fisher, his colleague, in NASA Ames. Whilst we were doing our virtual reality studies and looking at trying to link it up to virtual environments and also use the same equipment to control mobile robots, of course, W Industries, or Virtuality as they became, were obviously doing an awful lot in the location-based entertainment centres with their stand-up and sit-down units. And of course, it was at the stage where you couldn't open a newspaper or turn on the TV without seeing these cumbersome sit-down units with this horrible Vizette headset with its Ergolock instrument of medieval torture, and people shooting down pterodactyls, spending, I don't know, £5 UK for a couple of minutes to shoot down a pterodactyl. And looking at this thinking, people are going to get the wrong idea about this. They're going to think it's no more than a game, but we know that it's much more than a game. And as a result of that, and it's a bit of an involved story, but to cut a long story short, I was quoted in the New Scientist as saying, I'm going to go to the government, I'm going to tell them what virtual reality is all about. And that was picked up by the BBC. And this was at the time of the Iran-Iraq War, I think. So it got put off, and then in early 1993, we appeared on BBC's 9 o'clock news, which was like huge, unbelievable. I've still got that the video of the interview because my dear mum sort of phoned up and complained that the jumper I was wearing was totally inappropriate for the BBC, but that's another story. It was horrendous. But after that article, or that item on the TV, where one of my colleagues, Andy Connell, who's still active in VR, we showed him using a hand controller, a wand, wearing the VPL headset, flying around what was actually the first ever CAD conversion of a Rolls-Royce jet engine. The frame rate was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. I mean, it must have taken every time he moved his head, it must have taken 2 seconds. And if I send you the video, you'll see this. But every time he turned his head, it generally slowly caught up with him. And then it showed a few other things. The day after, the phones to the Robotics Centre didn't stop ringing. We had companies from all over the UK saying, that's the first time we've seen virtual reality and somebody's not playing a game. How do we get involved? I thought, well, this is too good an opportunity to miss. So we put together an initiative called VRS, Virtual Reality and Simulation. And we started off with 12. Eventually it went up to 17 or so companies, large and small, all of whom paid a membership fee depending on their size and depending on their interest, for us to do what we still call today concept demonstrators. So something that could be of use to their business. If it ended up not being of use to their business, then they haven't spent an awful lot of money in buying kit, which would end up gathering digital dust. So over a period of about 3 or 4 years, VRS produced demonstrators for the petrochemical industry, for the health service, for retail, for new architecture, new builds, a whole host of, and of course for the Rolls-Royce engine, which we took further, and also for submarine compartments for a company called Vickers Shipbuilding and Engineering, who then went on to become BAE Systems Submarines. So that 3 years, that VRS initiative of showing the UK, and indeed parts of the world, VR is more than a virtuality pterodactyl shoot 'em up experience, I think did us the world of good. At the time, by the time we'd finished that, I suppose it was getting towards the mid 1990s, and unfortunately, because people had already spent money on getting hold of some of the game systems which didn't deliver for their businesses, we began to see one of the first slides of virtual reality downhill in terms of adoption. But fortunately, it never got to the stage where it completely bombed out. Thank goodness. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here. It's a very good question. I mean, we're constantly finding new opportunities in the virtual heritage sector, where, for example, when we use virtual reality to interpret sonar scans, and then that enables us to send our own little remotely operated submersibles down to look at what's actually underwater. That was quite unique in some respects. And doing things like, I mean, obviously using LiDAR or sort of aerial photography to create three-dimensional models of remote environments. That was novel at the time. Of course, it is no longer. I still find that virtual reality in healthcare is a challenge. We see an awful lot, as you're aware. I mean, we see an awful lot of virtual reality in healthcare solutions, so-called solutions, on sites like LinkedIn. But I'm still concerned that there's an awful lot of gimmickry going on within healthcare in terms of using whether it's the HoloLens or Magic Leap, or whether it's the haptics glove or the Sense glove, these technologies, which are I still believe are not yet fit for human purpose in safety critical conditions. So yeah, a lot of what we do, I mean, the mixed reality work we do for the Royal Centre for Defence Medicine, that was, and I still believe it, or it was up until Vario brought out their XR3 headset. That was groundbreaking. I mean, we were using modified vides with a single camera, because you don't need stereo. Stereo is overrated. To create this hybrid mixed reality between using real objects to make the virtual more believable. That, hopefully that's phase 3 is going to be starting quite soon now, hopefully in June. So every so often we do get quite major challenges. Somebody will bring us a project suggestion, and we sit down. 50% of the times we turn them away. 50% of the times we just take a deep breath and say, let's go for it. It's the ergonomics human factors tends to feature very low in the food chain when it comes to developing products that are fit for purpose in the operating theatre and for training, I think. And I say that with some degree of harsh personal experience, because we did the same in the mid-90s with the keyhole surgery trainer that I developed, or that I invented, my colleagues built together for me for testing. In that, initially we went in and thought, yes, of course the surgeon needs stereo, of course the surgeon needs haptic feedback, of course the surgeon needs realistic looking tissue, when the surgeons did not need that. And unfortunately, our solution was a desktop virtual reality system with realistic looking instruments that cost £5,500 instead of £750,000. I mean, that was the difference, and that, for that reason, that particular product became the de facto European trainer for a decade. And I think ergonomics, the role of ergonomics in getting people to think about what aspects of the system will deliver, and that's both technology and content, will deliver the outcomes that you desire, is mentioned only rarely on places like LinkedIn and other social sites. And I think that shows in the quality of a lot of the papers that are produced. It's getting better, but the experimental designs, the cohort sizes, the metrics that are used for measuring things like impact, training transfer, skill fade, the metrics, they're still crying out to be defined in a much more human-centric way. They're still not good enough. Yet these things are getting, they're getting FAA approval. They're even getting, in the UK we have the MRHA. One or two of them are getting approval, and I can't understand why. Because again, the technology is far too immature at the moment. So yes, efficacy, I say efficacy in terms of training transfer and skills fade and other human performance metrics, absolutely essential. But to do that, you need the human factors, the ergonomics, from the outset. And you need to engage with the end users and a range of end users all the way through the design process. And that doesn't happen. Or if it does, it's very rare. The guys who have asked me to advise them are fully aware of the importance of getting the human-centered design in first. So that was good, because if people come to me and just want advice on which headset to buy, it's a waste of my time. The other project I'm involved in is to do with terraforming Mars, and because of my science fiction nuttiness, you can understand that's quite interesting for me. I think the metaverse, I mean, at the moment, it's just in chaos. There are so many startups. You see my comments on LinkedIn. There are overnight experts. There are overnight startups that have been professing metaverse for years and years and years, and yet all they're doing is, most of it's not even like Second Life. Most of it's just shared virtual environments on a small scale. Okay, may have some ambitions and possible positive directions for the future, but a lot of it's just shared virtual environments into which people join and have fun. I mean, even the conferences that I've seen being held in metaverse, so-called metaverse, have been not conferences I would attend. But, you know, it reminds me very much of my first experience with Second Life. You got all these crazy people doing backward flips and hovering around with their partial bodies and their disembodied hands. And I think to myself, how can anyone take a professional presentation seriously in that environment? I think once we start to see at a societal level the metaverse, whatever way it evolves, and I'm not going to put a definition on it because that just preoccupies too many people. It's not productive. But I think if the metaverse delivers something, particularly in education and experiences for kids, that is safe and can make a demonstrable impact on their contribution to the real world, then I think we're on to a winner. Which is one of the reasons I'm involved with this company and their Safe Metaverse for School Kids project. In terms of VR in academia, yeah, this is a tricky one. Over the 35 years I've been doing this, I've seen virtual reality in academia come and go, mostly go. I've seen centres of so-called virtual reality excellence being built, enormous amounts of money funded on technology that is relevant today and a mausoleum piece tomorrow. I've never really seen any sound examples of incubation strategies whereby companies, large and small, can go try stuff out and then come away with something that is in a form they can adopt and take further. I've never seen any comprehensive VR courses being offered by VR in academia or by academia. In fact, on a few occasions, when I was a company director of the company that came out of the Robotics Center, we wouldn't take on employees who had a first degree in virtual reality because they end up being jacks of all trade, masters of none. In contrast, if somebody came to us with a physics degree or an electronics degree or a computing degree, and they had a portfolio of their projects which had virtual reality, then yes, because they had the mainstream academic qualification to fall back on. So I think academia in VR, it's a long way of saying it's got an awful long way to go before it gets itself into a level of maturity where it can make an impact on the real world, and when it can make an impact on integrating with companies. It's not there yet. It should have been here by now, but still there's too much focus about having the biggest, the best, and the most humongously equipped virtual reality center without really thinking who it is you're delivering to. And when I joined the university, when I left my previous company as a company director and went to the university, and the vice chancellor said to me, "What do you want to set up a virtual reality center?" I said, "I don't want anything. I do not. Please don't ask me to do a virtual reality center, or I will not join this university." Because what we found since 2003, and my little team, is that the biggest impact you can get from virtual reality is to take it to the people who need to see it, need to understand it, with a decent portfolio of applications demonstrators. So don't take underwater games or Finding Nemo or whatever you can buy and download for the Quest or what have you. It's got to be focused, and you've got to take it to the people who are ultimately going to use it. And that's a very long answer to your question about virtual reality in academia. I think virtual heritage to me is about making the invisible visible, simply that. And the more you can do that on people's doorsteps, the more you get buy-in from the general public, the more you get buy-in from school. Virtual heritage is my passion. I mean, you know, I've been involved in defense activities, underwater activities all my life, but virtual heritage is my passion because it means that the team gets out, we get out and we get dirty, we get seasick. We're doing Indiana Jones type stuff on a small scale, and we're interacting with the public. It's great to go out, for example, when we were trying to find the old torpedo nets in a reservoir north of Plymouth, and we were doing measurements and flying drones and sending our little submersible down. And people come to us saying, what are you doing? And they want to, and it's great. And they not only do they talk to us, the next thing we know is 2 or 3 days later, they've gone back into their homes. They've pulled out their shoebox from under a bed. They found pictures of the reservoir back in the 1940s, which confirmed that there were torpedo nets across the reservoir. And that to me is absolutely fabulous. It's the number of things we've had from people that have filled in gaps in our knowledge, just because we've taken the virtual reality out and discussed it with people who need to know. Things like the Mayflower project, which we delivered finally last year. A little bit of a shame because unfortunately none of the Mayflower organising teams, again, I don't know why, just decided they weren't interested, so we didn't get any funding for that at all. But taking the virtual reality system down to Plymouth, the Plymouth Barbican, which is the location where the Mayflower set sail from back in 1620. And we had an online raffle for tickets for members of the general public, and we had school teachers, we had kids, old people, and we had people from all walks of life come along, put on the headsets. The lovely guys at OVR loaned us 2 of their their ion olfactory displays. So this was the first time these people had experienced, not just experienced virtual reality, but experienced smell as well. And to get comments from them saying, I'll never be able to walk along the street outside this building again with the same eyes. That to me is reward enough. We've opened their eyes as to things that are on their doorstep that they never knew existed. Where are you? Oh, the hoverboard is just the hoverboard has just dropped out, and there's even the almanac, the sports almanac on the seat, but it hovers and it lights up, and it's absolutely it's super cool. My youngest wants that one, and then, as I say, the other one that my dear mum couldn't afford at the time is, if I bring, is this going to work? Oh. It comes in from the side, so I have to come back a bit. Is the Johnny 7 one-man army, which is like seriously cool. You can also, if you collected, do you remember the old American Bazooka Joe chewing gum? Yeah, well, if you collected a number of Bazooka Joe chewing gum vouchers, the little cartoons they had inside the packet, you would get a substantial discount on one of these. I never did, unfortunately, because it was still, at the time, it was still out of my mum and dad's price range.